Okay, good evening, guys. Thank you for joining us. My name is Trevor Mukoli.
So we have two people joining us from northern Uganda. Regina Akulu is one of the panelists, and her colleague David. For just introducing the talk, you can mute now, and the presenter will come in after Ruth makes the introductions.
Public Square is a civil society organization and think tank dedicated to platforming ideas that organize people, foster debate, and shape opinions to improve democratic outcomes. Our work is deeply rooted in Uganda's socio-political landscape, and we strive to revitalize civic engagement among young people through rigorous research and innovative media. Our mission is to show that politics is not just an abstract concept, but an integral part of daily life and popular culture. We work in these four broad areas: public accountability, entrepreneurship, innovation and trade policy, climate justice and energy transition, and lastly, civic education. Today we are gathered to discuss a topic of great significance and urgency, the Balaalo Crisis in Uganda. This issue affects many lives and touches on critical aspects of land tenure, identity, and socio-economic policies in our country. It is a topic that requires our serious attention and thoughtful discourse. While the Balaalo crisis is a grave matter involving historical injustices, land conflicts, and policy challenges, it is imperative that we approach this discussion with a mindset that encourages open dialogue and constructive engagement. By making complex issues like this approachable, we can foster better understanding and inspire collective action towards solutions. We are also joined by an esteemed panel of thinkers who will contribute to the discussion following the presentation of Mr. Twina Masiko. Our panelists include Mr. Edgar Tawaro, who is a lawyer and political commentator, Francis Akorikin, who is a district chairman of Kapelebyong, and Lawe Muhwezi, our panel moderator. Each of our panelists brings a wealth of knowledge and diverse perspectives that will enrich our conversation today. Thank you, and let's begin our discussion.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Twina Masiko. I'm a member of Public Square. Thank you for honoring our invitation and for joining us on what the Guyanese anti-colonial and imperialism scholar and activist Walter Rodney called groundings with my brothers. It is at this point that we gather in an attempt to think about the issues that afflict us as a society, as a country, and we think back to the grassroots. The issue that we gather today to discuss is the issue of pertinent importance. If it doesn't epitomize Uganda's fragile state structure, then it sensationalizes it. The Balaalo question in Uganda. Due to its very nature, it constitutes a question among very many other questions that sit at the heart of the construct that we find ourselves catered in or willingly occupy, called Uganda. So I will ask my friend here to pray the video and then we begin. So we gather here to understand who the Balaalo are, the people called Balaalo in Uganda, because of the 65 or so recognized tribes, or call them nations as you would like, that constitute the country called Uganda. There is no ethnicity called the Balaalo. So how do the Balaalo become a people? How are they defined? What is their shared values, customs that make them a people to be defined in the way they are defined? And for me, my understanding and in our research, we found that the Balaalo or the term Omulalo was defined in Uganda. What we see today in northern Uganda and in earlier years in Bulisa was a spillover of this definition. The people, when they were defined in Uganda, they were defined as immigrants. Immigrants who worked within Uganda or who moved with their cattle in areas in Uganda Kingdom. And so they were defined as immigrants who moved within Uganda. But how does Uganda come to see itself as an internal polity outside of those migrations? That if those migrations spilled into Uganda, those people become immigrants. Because the idea of immigration within the country called Uganda pre-colonial was unheard of. It was very easy for someone to move across territories and was assimilated or could adopt a new identity. So how these people become Balaalo? Our first understanding of this is that indirect rule created what were then called tribal homelands. Tribal homelands is that a people, let's say Uganda, so Uganda was divided among tribes. So they would say, let's say they found 26 clans in Acholi. So they say Acholi becomes a district. Bagisu in Bukedi and Bagwere. So Mbari becomes a Bagisu city. Bukedi becomes a Bagwere city. So they defined, so boundaries became permanent. And they were not permanent only in the border permanence, the physical permanence, but also the identity. So if you're in Uganda and you occupy Masaka, you're only in Uganda. If you cross into Uganda, but you're not in Uganda, so you become an immigrant. But it's not what it was. So the first definition, how people that were cattle keepers entered Uganda and became Balaalo and couldn't assimilate, began at that point. So the terminology of the Balaalo, so in Uganda, the nomadic people of the Great Lakes region, okay. Until now, there is no consensus on the identity of the people culturally referred to as Balaalo. Scholars like Frank Muhereza maintain that the Balaalo terminology should be understood as a descriptive category that combines the pastoral nomadic people of the Great Lakes region. In the government reports, the Balaalo are referred to as herdsmen employed by livestock owners to look after the cattle. In public debates, they are known as migrant cattle keepers who roam the region without a definable home. Historically, Omulalo originates from people's living conditions. In late colonial Uganda, pastoralists moved en masse the regions primarily occupied by the Baganda. Contrary to popular opinion that Balaalo were cattle herders for Baganda landlords, many had just moved to Uganda during times of turmoil in Ankole region and Uganda's southern neighbors. The Baganda referred to the cow's resting shed as a chiraro. Since Bahima, and to the extension of Banyarwanda, usually slept with their cows, they took over the Balaalo name with seemingly derisive and condescending undertones of the Uganda aristocracy. This label came to take its form as every migrating cattle keeper from southwest Uganda came to wear it and all its historical garbage. The migratory origins of the people known today as the Balaalo can be traced back to the earliest recorded migrations in colonial Uganda, which took place as a result of the 1980. The first migration, large mass migration, was the 1908 Tsetse outbreak that originated from Tanzania and made its way into Uganda, adversely affecting the cattle keeping areas of Ankole. The epidemic, which followed shortly after the rinderpest surges of the 1890s, inevitably caused mass movement of people from the areas of Nyabushozi to other parts of former Karagwe in Tanzania and Kochi in present-day Rakai. Some pastoralists moved to northern Uganda, Bulemeza and Mubende, while others went as far as Teso and Lango. With an increasing number of outbreaks, the veterinary situation along the cattle corridor worsened in 1940s and 50s as cases of sleeping sickness among cattle keepers and severe nagano in cattle were an all-time high. In fact, I have some data on the population. Okay, it says it is important to know that Homian population have dramatically fluctuated in Nyabushozi County. From 1949 to 1959, there was an overall decrease in population. In 1959, Nyabushozi had the lowest population density of any county in Uganda, at 9 people per square mile. So we see that people who had originally occupied the places in Ankole and mostly the county of Ankole, which had the largest population of cattle keepers, migrated en masse during those outbreaks, rinderpest and tsetse fly infections. And they moved to places like Uganda and upwards in Bunyoro, and some crossed Choga region and entered the north. So those were the first recorded migrations of people that were cattle keepers, either from Rwanda or from Ankole. So our analysis of the situation broadly narrows down the problem of the Balaalo into 4 broader categories. We say that the land tenure system of pre-colonial and post-colonial Uganda created these internal immigrants. The second one was the conflict between pastoralism and conservation, that the two could not coexist. And the third is the politics of the day. And then we reach conclusion. So we shall go through each. So we begin with the land tenure system. Not many groups in Uganda can be accused of illegally entering a district, a region, or a sub-region. There might be a few differences concerning where these people originally come from, but they are united by their way of life, pastoralism. Their migration and all they entail can often cause an alarm and an abundant source of fodder to easy and cheap identity politics for most parties involved. Since land is central to the current conflict in northern Uganda, with the customary land tenure system remaining a pivotal point of contention, it is crucial to understand and put to question the state's policy toward pastoralists and the land they occupy from a historical perspective, along with the rationale that has informed it over time. Wilberforce Kisamba Mugerwa, a former minister for agriculture in the 1990s, wrote that colonial policy created native freeholds that were particular to only 2 regions in Uganda, Tolo and Ankole. In 1900 and 1901, agreements of these respective kingdoms carried land settlement provision that set out a distribution scheme for all land in the kingdoms. What this achieved over time was to frame settlement and rights that came with it as primary sedentary practice, thereby excluding transhumance as practiced by pastoralists. This policy encouraged those who practiced cultivation and those whose sustenance did not require constant movement to legally acquire parcels of land permanently, even though the tenure regime was that of restricted freeholders for everyone. The rationale behind this was economic, and it aimed to improve agricultural productivity to the extent that it guaranteed revenue to the government of the day. Since pastoralists were practicing a subsistence mode of production, they could not be taxed, unlike the cultivators who could sell surplus produce or grow cash crops for export. To supplement the findings of East African Royal Commission, which had been appointed in 1953 by Regional Colonial Administration on the Improvement of Agricultural Development, the USAID World Bank Gregory Report was released to prove that commercial beef production was economically viable in most of the cattle corridor. This is how the famous Ankole Massacre ranching scheme was conceived. Both these reports, which informed its creation, had recommendations that agreed on 2 things. Firstly, a land tenure policy sought to individualize ownership to facilitate transactions of that land to render it easily accessible for economic use. Secondly, land tenure was not allowed to develop spontaneously. Instead, the government guided its development to meet the needs of modern economy. This meant that customary land tenure system and state policy, especially concerning development, were opposed. As soon as the government adopted the Gregory Report, pilot schemes of its implementation led to numerous surveys of individual parcels of land across southwestern Uganda. Land not registered as either mile or freehold was deemed public land under the colonial system, further benefiting those who did not have to migrate in the practice of transhumance. Under the ranching scheme, the government gave away approximately 700 miles of land to select individuals, most of whom were political elites and not pastoralists. The elites who took on these ranches ended up absconding and becoming absentee landlords, creating a vacuum filled by an influx of squatters whom the very scheme had created. That the ranching scheme of 1960 literally said that we were going to divide this land according to the people we selected. So I could say, Mr. Tavalo, you're going to take 10 square miles of land. And the people who were originally occupied that land. So you have to remember that up to 1960s, Nyabshoz was literally empty. Because of the diseases that have afflicted it, people had moved outside of it. So when the Gregory Report was released around 1963, they said that now after this release of the report, and this is what its implementation involved of dividing parcels to 100 square miles, I think 100 ranches between Masaka and Mbara, and they were going to be given to these people. The selection was just, it was not based on, let's say, that these people kept cattle on these ones, because even up to now we have those ranches and they have names. We can say this is the name, like the ranch, like Ranch 46 is the ranch, they call it Eriaba Father, meaning the ranch of Catholics. There is a ranch in a place across Sanga, opposite Sanga, it's called Eriaba Nyibanda, people from Uganda. There is a ranch, and those who are 10 square miles, 15 square miles, there is Eriaba Nyashema. There is a ranch, they could just say, 15 square miles here, you're given to this person. So the people who occupied that land at that time were merely displaced without any little compensation. So that becomes the second point in which people are dispossessed of their land without compensation, creating the people we see today known as Balaalo. I hope we're on the same pace. As soon as the government adopted the Gregory Report, pilot schemes of its implementation led to numerous surveys of individual parcels of land. It then became evident in the planning and implementation of the ranching scheme that pastoralists were a problem because of their uneconomic way of life. Even though veterinary precautions such as fly infestation provided a valuable pretext for their perpetual disenfranchisement, since there was no provision for the displaced herders who did not get ranches, many migrated northwards into Uganda, especially to Bulemezi and Buwekura, sowing the first seeds of the 1990 the rancher-squatter crisis, or which is known among academic circles as the Magora Uprising of 1990. After independence, Idi Amin's 1975 Land Reform Decree made all land public that belonged to the state through the Uganda Land Commission. The state only offered usufruct rights to individuals or even group of individuals, with the majority of pastoralists who still depended on customary occupants deemed to be holding that land at sufferance. Traditionally, pastoral areas fell under this category since in Ankole and other parts of the Cattle Corridor, most of the Bahima and Banyarwanda refugees and immigrants had never acquired leases. From the 1960s, when the Lekumburo area turned into a game reserve, the local community maintained access rights even after its own influx of pastoralists fleeing the 1979 war that had started from the predominantly pastoral Kagera region in northern Tanzania. In 1983, the UPC government, through its youth wingers and stalwarts, carried out pogroms against the pastoral communities in Lekumburo for allegedly supporting the NRA guerrillas and providing recruitment base for the rebellion. On being evicted, most of those who did not go southwards to Rwanda or Tanzania made their way into ranches of the Ankole massacre scheme as squatters. When they later returned to Mburo in 1985 after NRA's takeover of Mbara district, they were evicted again in 1986 with neither compensation nor resettlement by the new government, which instead settled its internal refugees that had been displaced from Royal Triangle by the Bush War. This discussion, it kind of reminds me of on the Jewish question. It's like when the Jews were contesting and said, we want emancipation. But you see, German originally was not emancipated. So it's people within an emancipated society asking for emancipation. But when we approach these questions, I think it's key to historically interrogate, because Uganda is a very, very problematic place. It's a very problematic polity, which a friend of mine once called the cradleland of war and bloodshed. That if we veer off from its course on how it organizes its society, we enter something we are not prepared for. And these questions are so important to understand Balaalo, not as how they are perceived today, but how they came to be created to enter into their present predicament. So there is a chronological link between expulsion of pastoralists from Uganda between the mid-1980s and early 1990s, a surge of numbers into northern Tanzania by early 2000s, their subsequent expulsion from the Kagera region, and their gradual influx back into Bulisa in western Uganda. There is that historical link that should be acknowledged and assessed if we are going to solve this problem or understand it fully. The Balaalo, who made their way presumably back into western Uganda between the years of 2000 and 2010, found the indigenous people of Bulisa, Banyoro, and Bugungu practicing both crop cultivation and livestock rearing, in addition to fishing on the shores of Lake Albert. This particular set of migrations was nothing out of the ordinary, except for the growing numbers as pastoralists as always migrated into the Rift Valley plains of Bulisa of many years, including the dry season, with part of their herds and left after rains returned as a practice of transhumance. So these regions of Uganda, I think from Omasha in Isinjiro, crossing the Kachera and Mburo, crossing River Katonga, entering northern, which is Tora and Bunyoro, into Masindi up to up north to Noya and then coming back. It was always a place where pastoralists could move according to seasons. So they could migrate to Wera, present-day Zimbabwe, and they could go back when rains fell to their places where they could go, either in Mburo, Nyabshozi, Buhweju, Sheman, and whatnot. So that region was up to Kagera and up to Rwanda. It's a place where pastoralists with a shared identity, a shared history crossed. In fact, if I'm to remember correctly, Kamuhanda, the then president of, after the 2010 evictions in Tanzania, Kamuhanda wondered that how can a people whose home is here, across borders of Mutukula in Uganda to Kagera, in the Bahia states, how could they lack a home? That this was originally their home. How could the borders ordered post-colonial deny people their home, that you do not belong here because the ordering of the borders did not find you here? So in this section, we see how Uganda's land-tenure system, since colonial rule and post-colonial regimes, exploited it to displace pastoralists. So the critical point of divergence, we have to go back to Bunyolo, is that the Bagun considered the land occupied by the Balaalo to be communal, but only to the extent that one was a community member. In contrast, the immigrant Balaalo considered the very land to be open access, and Nelafa sought to own it through leases and titling because of the increasing land pressure. Then, with historical precedence and full force, the citizenship of the Balaalo, who had allegedly acquired land fraudulently, came into question, even though Bulisa at the time was also hosting migrants from DRC engaged in mining, agriculture, and fishing. There was always a contestation over land ownership between the indigenous people and the migrants because these did not attract queries on citizenship as the Balaalo issue did. In December 2010, the evictions of the Balaalo from Bulisa started with a total of 700 families with about 20,000 heads of cattle who were forcibly removed from the disputed land by the military in what came to be known as Operation Justice. Can you imagine? Led by David Sejusa, who, anyway, was then coordinator of National Intelligence Services. 2 days later, when the Masindi High Court issued an interim order restraining the government from evicting or occupying the land in dispute, the pastoralists had already been expelled, and events had thus overtaken the court order. This massive state-sanctioned eviction led to relocation, with some of the Balaalo crossing further into the West Nile and Noya districts, and other going into Chiriandongo, Changwali, in Chikube and Masindi districts. So we see how Balaalo come to go to the north. From 1983, Nerekumbulo and Nyabshozi areas, to the evictions of Obote 2, they cross to Kagera region. The Tanzanians chased Balaalo under pretext that they actually carried guns, and that was dangerous to the state of Tanzania. They crossed back into Uganda, but cannot settle in the areas they once occupied as quarters because the ranchers had overtaken their lands. They crossed into Bulisa. Now they are evicted in Bulisa. In 2010, they crossed via ferries and enter Noya and those regions in the north from around 2010 to where we are now. So that is how the land-tenure system refuses to accommodate Balaalo and refuses to offer them a place in a country that is, to a large extent, their own. The second point is pastoralism and conservation. There is a paradox of policy. Pastoralists are generally understood as people for whom livestock contributes significantly to their livelihoods and income. In Uganda, according to Jacob Balasa, pastoralism was understood as an extensive livestock production with or without mobility. Although in Ethiopia, pastoralism was imposed on a geographical area where pastoral groups predominate, and in Kenya, pastoral districts were demarcated. In Uganda, the official government stands labeled only the Karamajong pastoralists and any other group that attempted it as illegal migrants. You see, Karamajong are understood as pastoralists. It's okay. But if you attempt the same from any other region, you become an illegal migrant. Many game reserves and national parks in Uganda occupy land that previously were inhabited by pastoral communities, Queen Elizabeth National Park came with the eviction of the Basongola. The gazetting of Lake Mbulo came with the eviction of the Bahima and Banyarwanda pastoralists, and from Ankole, and then later Mbara district. And by the time Balaalo were evicted from Obudisa, more than 80% of the land was gazetted for conservation purposes even before oil exploration efforts took precedence. Simply put, there is a direct link between conservation efforts as a result of state policy and the landlessness that afflicts the pastoral communities. There is no doubt that the forced evictions of this group of people from their communally owned lands to establish game reserves and conservation areas is historically consistent and raises concerns that challenge the very rationale of these government-led conservation policies. The arguments usually make a case for population pressure and their effect on the ecosystem. However, in examination, the multifaceted impact of these evictions, it becomes evident that they not only infringe upon the rights of the indigenous communities in fundamental ways, but also exacerbate the very problems they set out to address. So here, I will try to go back to how people were evicted in lands that were formerly their own. For centuries, prior to 1894, the first European contact, the area from Bukanga, north of the Kagera River, to Katonga River in the north was called Nkore Kingdom and was ruled by Yomugabe, the king of the Banyankore people. The king controlled access to numerous environmental resources in the area, such as water sources and pasture land, and designated the Nshara areas, specifically where the Mburu community occupies, and swamp areas as communal pasture, which was generally allocated for herders to use for grazing. In oral history of the Banyankole, the area now condoned off as the Kumburo National Park was always integral to the pastoral lifestyle of the Bahima. It was the only place in Ankole and Greater Buhejo region with natural access to two Nkole's fresh water bodies, Lake Kumburo and Lake Kachera, which meant that the seasonal movements revolved around these lands. The first move at conservation began in 1935 when the British Protectorate government declared that there would be two neighboring controlled hunting areas, Nshara, present day, the Kumbu National Park in Nyabushozi County, Chirhura District, and Masha in Sinjiro. Designation as a controlled hunting area permitted hunting activities as well as grazing at that time, farming and fishing. The area subsequently experienced a tsetse fly infection, as I had earlier highlighted, and so people moved out from that place. In 1964, the post-colonial government transformed the Nshara controlled hunting area into a game reserve, banning pastoral activities within the area under the pretense that the migratory nature of the pastoral Bahima didn't accord them permanent land within this area. This coincided with the government policy to commercialize land under the infamous Ankole ranching scheme that divided communal land into ranches for the select few depriving pastoralists of their land without compensation. The displaced population roamed further north until loose policies of a mean era that saw pastoralists return to these areas. They were joined by Banyarwanda refugees after the 1959 Rwanda Revolution that saw their influx into Uganda, in Ankole, Uganda, and northwards into Bunyoro. It is important to note that human populations have dramatically fluctuated in Nyabushozi County. I had highlighted this. However, from 1959 to 1969, after the tsetse fly infection, the country had over 1,000 people per square mile. It had a population increase at a rate of 310%, the highest in the country at the time. In Nyabushozi County, at then, populations in 3 sub-counties increased by over 40,000 people between 1969 and 1980. Populations then decreased from 77,838 to 76,200 between 1980 to 1991. This was not coincidental. The National Parks Act, Chapter 227, Laws of Uganda 1964, permits the designation of areas as national parks, which includes protection of the resources and wildlife and restricts human inhabitants inside its boundaries. In 1983, the Obote government transformed the game reserve. That was the first policy. It transformed the game reserve into a national park. In a way, he didn't do it out of his conservation or his love for animal protection. It was a counterinsurgency plot in which he saw. So during Obote 2, there was this science and syndicate politics of the Obote. So the science group, maintained that the problem was the Bahima supporting the NRA regime in Ruwero by providing meat for eating, cattle, and even manpower. So Obote, in a way to disrupt that kind of coordinated effort of the Bush War, made the game reserve, the Kumburo, into a permanent national park, and in a way evicted all the people that occupied it at that point without any effort or anything for compensation. So it was like, you move out from this place, find a way of existing. In 1983, the Obote government transformed the game reserve into a national park, giving the Uganda Wildlife Authority exclusive authority to control its use and access to resources within. As earlier highlighted, the reasons were purely counterinsurgents approach against the NRA Bush War. According to official figures, in 1983, an estimated 4,500 families, as well as Rwandan refugees and internally displaced people who had entered and occupied the reserve during Amin's reign, were forcibly evicted, and several individuals were killed. After the fall of the Obote government in 1986, pastoralists that had survived the suffering moved back to the Kumburo. Although many evictees returned to land inside the Kumburo National Park, many others remained landless. Many of these people were squatting on the Ankole Ranching Scheme land. The park management authorities, the government of Uganda, and the ranch restructuring board worked to settle families who were squatting on ranches or living in the periphery or illegally inside the park. So after coming to power in 1988, Museveni tried to find a way of how he could harmonize this, how he could provide land, how he could bring back, how he could give back people their land. But I argue, and we argue, that the efforts were minimal and they merely addressed a very meager percentage of the people that had suffered under prior displacements. So that's how conservation in Uganda from Bugungu, the Kumbu National Park, had worked in tandem with government and its policies to displace and exclude people from their lands, from their indigenous lands. The third point that afflicts the Balaalo today is the crisis of political legitimacy in northern Uganda. During the 2010 Bulisa evictions, which took place in western Uganda, Muheleza, 2012, argued that whereas the acquisition of land by all outsiders entailed significant political maneuvering, only the Balaalo were evicted mainly because they presented themselves as the embodiment of the state. Owing to the remarkable similarities between pastoralists and the regime in power, the state had no intention of being seen as lenient toward the Balaalo, and therefore evicted only them to safeguard its political fortunes in the region. A similar dynamic seems to be playing out in northern Uganda, where the Balaalo, on the sole basis of their perceived ethnic identity and not economic activity, present the state with a perfect pretext to be seen to be impartial on broader matters of land tenure. Emphasis should be shifted away from charges of animal destroying crops of indigenous people due to the absence of fencing and water points, as Museveni maintains in his points that Balaalo should adopt such that be welcome in northern Uganda, not because it is not essential or that it does not happen because it is easier to remedy than the charge of procuring communal customary land from individuals. The other charge, one that has been echoed even by the Chief Justice, is that the peasant nomadic pastoralists are mere proxies for high government ministers and soldiers who use either the state resources at their disposal to procure Acholi land on a large scale or tools of coercion to forcefully grab large tracts of communally owned land for their cattle to graze. The tacit agreement places Western Uganda as the origin of these government officials and the Balaalo as their manifestation in northern Uganda. This particular charge ignores two things. Firstly, that nomadism predates 1986 when the NRA took power. There is a record to show that the Balaalo migrated to northern Uganda with their cattle as far back as the 1940s to run away from the Nagana epidemic or to look for menial work that involved herding cattle belonging to the indigenous people. Secondly, there is a class issue at play here. Even if it was true, which most probably is not, that the smaller Balaalo had the smaller Balaalo had cattle for the big men. They do so not as a function of ethnic solidarity, but as employees and therefore as mere workers, since their livelihood is not derived from cattle, but from wages paid for herding. If considered, that would mean that the peasant Balaalo, who far outnumber their ethnic compatriots in government, have more in common with actual indigenous people, thereby altering the national tone towards their plight. At the intersection of power and pastoralism lies a historic event that exemplifies how state policy checks the growing influence of political figures from pastoralist communities. Okay, here we go back to try to show you how Museveni is employing the tactics of colonial rulers. In 1906, the colonial administration of Sir Hezekiah Bell compelled Omugabe Kahaya II of Ankora and his chiefs to give up 10%, what was then called Envuma, of all their cattle, with their ownership going to his Balaalo subjects who had only previously enjoyed usufruct rights. Any resistance was made with the impounding of contested cattle, which is known as Okukamata. The Banyankore still refer to this period as Wisharamasio, that Omugabe had cattle that the Balaalo used to herd for him. But he possessed that kind of power that threatened colonial rule. So in order to cut him to size, the colonial government said you have to cut your cattle and you have to give it away to the Balaalo herders. So it's what called Wisharamasio, that Balaalo came, Omugabe, the colonial government forced Omugabe to give away his cattle to Balaalo herders for forever ownership, not as just his herders, but as their own. So we argue that in a way, President Museveni's recent executive order number 3 can be understood to be a deployment of a similar form of realpolitik. The rationale for his actions would then best be understood as an attempt to rein in the growing power and influence of his own political and military elite, who have amassed property and wealth in the north at the expense of his fragile political negotiation with formerly war-torn Acholi sub-region, with the Balaalo acting as proverbial sacrificial lamb. Because the argument, at least among Uganda's historians, they argue that whereas Museveni had political legitimacy in the south, he actually conquered the north by conquest. On video? In that case, who is genuinely being evicted? Is it the Bashima elites or the peasant Balaalo who now find themselves in the crosshairs of this debacle? This is evidenced by the correspondence between the president and his brother, which differ in tone, with the former resolute and the latter filled with restraint for several reasons. By evicting the Balaalo from northern Uganda, the state makes political and economic gains at the expense of the rights of individual members of the Balaalo community, who in most cases lawfully occupy land, and their rights as groups of pastoralists. The political gains at the extent that it retains support during elections as an outcome of its populist actions, and the economic gains at the extent that it successfully positions itself to gazette the land in contention for development purposes, which often includes external actors. In Burisa, it was for oil and gas development, and in Acholi sub-region, it could be for large-scale commercial agriculture. The unspoken bit is that the Acholi indigenous people will most likely not benefit from the land left behind by the Balaalo upon their eviction, solely because it will remain heavily influenced by the state. For example, the Bagungu of Burisa were never allowed to access the land they were fighting the Balaalo over, as the state deployed heavily, thereby preventing them from putting it to any use, including that for which it was formerly available before the contestation with the Balaalo started. So the disposition is twofold. First, the state uses coercive means to enforce and therefore define customary land rights for the indigenous population in the area of contestation to exclude the Balaalo. Then on evicting the foreign and disciplined Balaalo, as they are called, having entrenched itself as the key stakeholder in all matters of ownership, the state now systematically goes on to dispose of smallholder owners of the land in question using the adjacent logic of tenure systems that make more economic sense through district land boards and other such ad hoc commissions. The position of forcibly defining customary land rights serves to blur the lines of ownership. Take, for instance, in recent years, there have been a good number of land-related scandals in northern Uganda, which have not been related to the Balaalo, but that can be best characterized as land grabs carried out for purposes of large-scale crop production for domestic and export markets involving transnational capital purchased by large corporations. This happens when fertile lands are taken from smallholder peasant farmers, mostly cultivators, by state-sponsored and political gazettement, which makes land available for commercial crop production and other such purposes. Northern Uganda accounts for a significant portion of the country's arable land and receives enough rainfall. This is evidenced by the recent large-scale investment made by the state and the private sector, including the 30 billion shilling government-owned Torch irrigation system in Oyam district and the 27,000-acre Atiak sugar project. In fact, for over a decade, the same Amuri district, which has been embroiled in a land wrangle with the Madvan group, over 10,000 hectares of land meant for sugar manufacturing operations, this land was given to the investor by the Amuri District Land Board against the wishes of its collective custodians and has since been a source of legal conflict. If the government succeeds in possessing the Balaalo of land they illegally acquired, as it has done before, then it suffices to say that the local smallholder actual farmers will not be spared either. This logic, informed by sacrifices of security of tenure at the art of political and economic expedience for the state, will be used through district land boards, judicial commissions of inquiry, and executive directors to take land from the actual people and give it more extensive commercial interests. So those are our 4 areas of arguments and analysis: land tenure system, conservation paradox, and Uganda's the current regime's political machinations. So what do we propose? We do not pretend to have rigorous policy recommendations that could see us out of this impasse. But we offer because 60% of Africa's arable land is used for pastoralism. So we think that a people's way of life should be, 1 way, respected, and 2, considered when you're drafting any policy paper and how to manage a people. In 2009, as African Union member states gathered in Kampala for the adoption of the Convention for the Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced Persons in Africa, the Bagungu, with sufficient help from the state, were chasing and expelling Balaalo from Brisa district. By the time of the adoption, there were close to 10 million internally displaced IDPs in Africa. Although it is a legally binding framework, the government of Uganda does not view the Balaalo as an internally displaced group that requires serious legal and policy intervention. The government's failure to define a clear and coherent political approach to resolving this perpetual crisis, or even acknowledge its scope, puts Uganda citizens at risk. There is a perennial problem across most of sub-Saharan Africa regarding the unending clashes between herders and farmers. Whereas in countries like Nigeria, the encroachment of herders to farmers' lands is partially informed by the continued desertification of northern rangelands due to climate change and Boko Haram violence. In Uganda, it is a product of both the colonial ordering and deliberate land policies that have continuously disenfranchised cattle-keeping communities from the southwest of the country. As previously highlighted, pastoralist internal displacement is often overlooked. Consequently, displaced pastoralists suffer from increased marginalization and get trapped in a poverty cycle with no end in sight. Following the collapse of the November 25th deadline given to the Balaalo, pastoralists vacate their trolley land in northern Uganda. President Museveni directed them to hire trucks and take their cows to whatever they take them, or else they would be confiscated and auctioned. As a solution, this is only a short-term compromise that protects the regime's immediate political interests while underlooking the origins of pastoralists and their animals. The government should prioritize the following: establish and strengthen conflict mediation, resolution, and reconciliation peace-building mechanisms. This should be done at national and local government levels and within rural communities, particularly in areas most affected by conflict. Although there is an identity crisis across the country's disparate regions and nationalists in a country ordered under capitalist regimes that appeases its fragile factions to exist, there is a need for serious intervention to create harmony if the Uganda project should continue functioning. Redefine the land laws. Confusion between customary rules and the state laws on the land tenure system has created fertile ground for growing conflict in Uganda. These different power structures, customary institutions for traditional leaders, and state institutions such as administrative officials, the police and the judiciary, often need consistent rules for accessing resources and managing conflict. Building bridges between these structures would foster a shared understanding and better accountability. established a committee to systematically study the origins of the Balaalo pastoralists, Balaalo to mean the migrating pastoralists with no home in the country, and offer a final policy alternatives to end their plight. International partners should also advocate for accountability and support livestock sector reform. There is a need for action by international humanitarian groups and development partners to interest themselves in this issue that threatens the peace and stability of the country. Thank you very much.
So the first thing I'm going to start with is the question that each of us has on our minds. And I'll start with Mr. Francis. From where you sit as the chairperson of Kapera Byong, to what extent does Junior's presentation counter or deal with the problem of the Balaalo? Does it explain the fate of the Balaalo and the situation that they are going through, or are we sidestepping the real problems? You could just react to the presentation. Thank you.
As I talk right now, 300 cows are hauled up in a sub-county headquarters in one of my districts where nobody wants them to leave. Yesterday, but one more 500 cows entered into a district. We're talking about a situation which is real and continues to be real every day. So as I talk, I don't know what will happen tonight to those people. I'm not there, and I'm discussing here a crisis, but there are Balaalos there. Now, I first want us to understand three things. In the presentation given by Trina Matsuko, he stated the Balaalo as the people. The first point here, we are having an amalgamation, a complex of several issues in one question. Now, when you listen to this presentation, for us who don't come from western part of Uganda, even Trina Matsuko, if you remove that laptop or tabaro, and he came with cows in Kapelebyo, he will be a Balaalo. This debates of Banyankole, of ABCD, everybody, whether you are, even by the way, even a Muganda, even somebody from Kampala here, you can be called Mukasa, and you are from Mukono, and you moved to northern Uganda and ABCD, you will also be called what? A Mulalo. And that's why we need to have a collective action on this matter. Because initially, everybody thought this matter was just a particular group. But it's becoming a national issue, which is threatening state formation. It's even threatening what forms a country. What does it make Uganda, Uganda? Now, when you have discussions with people in the state, they will give you that narrative. These people, they came from Kagera, a particular group, 1970s, 1980s. The challenge we have had with this description is that while the historical context wants to define Balaalo in a very abstract way, what they do, they keep cows. But the challenge we have had is that these cows, the type of cows, by naming, those cows are called Ankole cows. But in the constitution of Uganda, there is a community called Banyankole. So President Museveni, even when he described it in his executive order, he gave a history of those people and tried to exclude Banyankole in that description. The fact that the people who are keeping these cows, who are called Balaalos, are keeping cows called what? Ankole. Even himself, apart from being a president, if he was not a president, he will also be called what? Hemulalo. The difference now is the what? Is the president. Why? I'm talking about the people, but now the cow also itself is named in Ugandan context. If it was Zebu, because let's look at the treatment. If you moved with the Zebu cows, you are an Itesot. You moved with the Zebu cows to Noya. Will you have the same connotations and discussions just like the way Ankole type of cows have? Certainly no, you'll have a different variation. So we're talking about, so in the country, so we have the people, we have the type of cow itself, which is what? Ankole. And this has complicated the identity politics that he was trying to bring in out here. Now, the question now will be, if we wanted to be fair Because last year we had a discussion with Salim Saleh as leaders of northern Uganda, Teso, Karamoja, Lango, on the Balaalo question. And in the presentation which was given there in Gulu, the leaders there told Saleh that question of ranches, that you mismanaged this problem in 1986 by mismanaging the allocation processes of those ranches and created an internal problem within Nyabushozi, as he was describing. And now you're making us suffer with the displacement effects of bad governance internally within the community of where? Of those areas. And they were telling them, go and sort out your problem. Where? In Nyabushozi. Now, the challenge we have had, as you know, the more he presented, the more my head also kept on swinging. How do I anchor my submission? As leaders in local governments right now, the president has given us an executive order. And as you know, the relationship between us, districts, and the position of the president. So ideally, we're supposed to implement the executive order. And the executive order has been given to us as members of the district committee to what? To implement. But we have had problems with implementing the executive order. If there is somebody here who can give feedback, but since you are putting this in, you have issues with the order. One, the order has discriminatory undertones in it. Somebody can be called Twino Mugisha, but he has a national identity card of Uganda. Now, within the constitution says land belongs to the people. And in Teso, Karamoja, Langwa, Acholi, land is customarily owned. Now, forget about the word communal. There is also custom. Even me as Francis, I can own land within the customs of where? Of Teso. Unfortunately, or fortunately, one of those indigenous communities that come there have gone ahead and parceled the land for people to have individual rights ownership of land within the customary systems. So we have had issues where Okello, or Akorikin, for instance, sells his land, 5 acres, to Tunomigisha at 10 million. Now you have an executive order which says Tunomigisha must live with his cows. Why? Because he has not fenced the provision that the president listed. Tunomigisha comes to me as a district chairman. Remember me, I swear in to protect the constitution. I don't swear to govern it so. I am a chairman for a district which must govern within the framework of the what? The constitution. Whether you're Tunomigisha, whether you're Okello, I'm duty bound to make sure that all your rights are upheld as a what? As a Ugandan, as a citizen. Tunomigisha gives an example and says, you're telling me the president, whom I even voted, is saying I should leave. But first of all, 1, this is my identity card. 2, I am Ugandan. But my neighbor who is Okello is having 50 cows. He doesn't have water. He doesn't have a fence. He's having zebu cows. And his cows are grazing communally. On a regular basis, he also has conflicts with the cattle, with the crop cultivators, just like the way I have. The difference now is that this executive order identifies me alone and leaves Okello, who is in the same enterprise and same locality. The difference now is that the order is targeting Ankole cows. The order is targeting the individuals. Unfortunately, given the way we form this country, it's easy to identify where somebody comes from, either by accent, either by face, either by name. And now, when the executive order makes it easy, then you're creating a scenario where the country can easily. Yet we are struggling to make this country move together. Now, so what has happened? What is the real issue now here? I mentioned there is one point that you should appreciate Tunamasco for bringing it up here. The emerging political trends. All of you know from 1996 when elections started in this country, Museveni has never lost. In this case, the president has never lost elections in Buganda. He has been winning elections in Buganda 96, 2001, until 2020 One. So there was a new NRM was forced, in quotes, to look for new allies to replace the political support within where? Within Buganda, or in this case, central Uganda. And that support came from the north. Lango, because as Buganda was pulling off, central Uganda was pulling off, there were new entrants into the house. Teso entered. Karamoja has been there anyway. Acholi entered. Alango entered. And that created a balance of what they call substitution methods in simultaneous equations. So what has happened is that recently, when there was this crisis of Balaalos entering the north, it threatened the fragile relationships between the political alliances being created because the Constitution says, let me give you an example. The Constitution says that for you to be declared the president of Uganda, you must get 50+1 vote. Imagine a scenario where Acholi goes off, Lango goes off, and Teso goes off. And Museveni was declared in the last election with 59 point something percent. Don't you think that 9% can get off? And he will become vulnerable. He will be at maybe 40, and Buganda maintains it, central Uganda maintains it. So because of that, we read that executive order, primarily, while it may wants to achieve the issues of Balaalo, issues and ABCD, also seeks to maintain the new politique that you ably stated. Unfortunately, if we approach national matters in that way, we will be not building a better country. Now, we have had issues. What does that now mean? It means that as a country, we must deal with this. We must handle these issues of Balaalos as a governance issue. In this case, a governance failure for Uganda as a country. And Uganda as a country must debate with it. The whole country must get interested in it. The challenge we have had, which Tunamasko stated, is what I want to describe to you now. These cows or Balaalos, what Balaalos are in Kapelebiung? Which ones are there? There are three types. There are Balaalos which are employed by Tesots who are keeping cows. You know, you have a Korikin, he's a district chairman. He has 100 cows. He employs Tabaro. And just like the way Annie Tesot comes to Kampala and he gets what? Employment. Maybe in this case a security guard, or he works in public square. But in this case, Tabaro now is having a different type of employment. This time he's keeping cows of who? He's a cattle herder. Because of his experience, because they grew up in this, that the president even ably mentioned in his executive order. That's the first type. And indeed, that's a majority actually. That's a majority. Yes. The second type is those who have bought land, customary land. We have had issues. I told people from Teso that if the line that the president has stated, that land which is customary should not be sold or bought because it should be controlled by customs. Remember that there's a line there. I told them that we can rely on that executive order and expel Balaalos. But after Balaalos have gone away, many of us have also bought land internally, which is also from different clans. The same principle now applies to us internally, because even if you go to Acholi, the elites in Acholi have also bought land. You can find somebody from Kitugu has bought land from Agago. Somebody from Agago has bought land from Noya. Somebody from Soroti has bought land from Kapelebiung. Somebody from Kapelebiung has bought land from Karamoja. Now, if you use this narrow definition, okay, let the Balaalos first go away. If you get clever chaps within those clans, then they will come. Then you'll have crisis upon crisis. So, my argument now was I don't even know where I was moving. So I was now saying that the second category of Balalos who are there are actually the ones that have bought land. And that's the one Salim Saleh gave us a book. You have seen Professor, this guy who is a Penbogi. We had issues in the north. And actually we disagreed as local leaders with MPs when we had a meeting there. Saleh, and when you look at the two leaders, General Saleh and President Museveni, Saleh's view is relatively moderate. And his view is that let's not approach this matter and destroy the fabric. Because the president had told them that in 2 weeks, get out. And Saleh says, but Your Excellency, may I stay here? Actually, Saleh moderated the what? Moderated the views of the what?
If you can
president.
make it quicker.
So, as I conclude, so the second category are those that have bought land. Now, there has been a discussion on whether that land was bought within the provisions of the law. There was no manipulation. That's another matter. But some of them have bought land. We can interrogate how that land was bought. But remember, that land was bought within the principles of free market what? Economies. So there has been a discussion whether that land, if you bought at 3 million, is this a right price? Then the last one the last category is the one that everybody is fearing. The one that has connections with state functionaries. And these state functionaries can be a powerful Tesot, a powerful Mugisu, a powerful Ankole, or a Muchiga in this case, or anybody else, which has connections with the state power. And all of you have tested. When it comes to political power in this country, all of you know, read the national dailies. All Ugandans, when they get power, all of them, there is no tribe which has monopoly to abuse it. Even if you made a Karimojong to be an IGP, okay, he will go and cause chaos. So what has happened is that we must confront and hold public leaders accountable, irrespective of whether they are. You have seen scenarios where corruption in this country. People say when it is your own, they say it's our own. So the third category is now that one, and that's the one villagers are very, very uncomfortable with. So that group that acquires resources, a lot of land, because for you to get over 100 acres of land in Acholi sub-region, you need to pay 200 million shillings. You all know. Where will you get 200 million? The standard of an LOC 5 is 1.7 per month. So the unfortunate part is that those who are acquiring land in huge chunks to hide them, because remember, cattle sector is not taxed, to hide them under the cattle economy and confuse and make the vulnerable balalos, in quotes, those who are very poor, who have herders, suffer, are using proceeds of corruption from public resources. So corruption, cattle economy now, anybody who has over 200 acres of land and is working in the government, he has stolen public resources and is hiding it in. You should have seen how everybody murmured when they say, let's tax the cows, if you have over 100 cows. So for me, that is the group, that public square, and all of us as citizens of this country should squarely hold accountable for misuse of public resources in order to hide in the cattle economy. So in my conclusion now will be, once we have discussed this matter, my conclusion will be the future, if we are to solve this problem, if we sort out the identity issues, which are very fragile, should be livestock keeping crisis in Uganda going forward.
Let us have Councillor Edgar also responding to the same question.
Now, I'm really here. I'm not an expert on Balaalo. And evidently, I'm not an expert at cattle keeping. But I do interact with cattle keepers. I tried grazing much earlier in my formative years of life as a hobby, but I never took it up. I became more of a tea planter in Kavarole, Fort Portal, and now a coffee planter. Having given you that background, basically to prepare you for the boredom I'm going to take you through. Now, these are my idle thoughts, and I'm here to basically learn and relearn. Now, Balaalo is really a derogative term. You have to get that very clear, particularly elite persons like you, elite creative persons that public square does attract. Balaalo is a derogatory term. It is actually in the reference to some kind of feudalism. You have a cattle keeper, a cattle owner, a herd owner, and you have a person who is employed to work on that herd, and for pay is not paid in terms of monetary, by way of monetary, rewarded in monetary terms, but proceeds from either milk or animals. Now, I mean, at the basic level, for persons like them who are from the pastoralist communities, it is very degrading, it's very humiliating. So, to evolve that terminology of Balaalo to an identity is the most disturbing aspect of this evolution in terms of social anthropology. If I called him a Mulalo, he would take it as an insult. And frankly speaking, it's just that, it's an insult. So having said that clearly, there are certain things that have not emerged from the discourse I've been hearing around. At the play of these issues is interstate or regional security dynamics that you don't hear being mutated in the discussions I find amongst protagonists, pundits, and stakeholders. The 2009 group that was evicted from Bulisa, unfortunately, it is a matter that I may be conflicted about because my old man is a retired judge, and he sat in the judgment of this matter. He granted an injunction, but the injunction was, it was here in the High Court of Uganda, it was sidestepped. The Honorable Biroahwa Mukitale, MP for Bulisa, and Dr. Kasirivu Atwoki, who was a state minister in government. I think was state minister for, was it economic monitoring? But at that time, I think he was state minister for lands. They lodged another application in the Masindi High Court for eviction of those landowners, of that group from Bulisa. They were forcefully evicted by General Tinyefuza, now widely known as Sejusa, and he was coordinator for security, he was coordinator national intelligence services in Uganda. Now, why would they bring an intelligence angle to it? Grace Bororoza, that group that was evicted from Bulisa, were actually evictees from Tanzania in Kagera. Now, why were they evicted in Kagera? There were certain state security issues that came up as a concern in Tanzania. And as a result, Tanzania carried out, I wouldn't say it out of this room, and I hope those who are responsible for editing will come with better words. They carried out ethnic cleansing and forcefully moved persons from the pastoral communities in that area. Because they had earlier migrated from Rwanda during the colonial days, but Tanzania being the country that is organized, they keep records. Now, there were no records for these persons having naturalized their citizenship in what? In Tanzania. And that's the reason they were evicted, and therefore their problems were exported to where? To Uganda. There's another group that went further south in Malawi. And if you go to, you'll find other dynamics very similar like this, even assassinations. There it is even more, because they met another group of Rwandan refugees of 1994 and created its own dynamics. But we're here to discuss the ones in Uganda. When you hear President Museveni speak, he condemns transhumance. He condemns nomadism. And I have a point of departure. His approach is coached in the 1990 to 1993 or 95. World Bank sponsored research paper on land reform in Uganda. That research was undertaken by persons who were Mutebire, the Mutebire orientation economic policies that really monopolized individual capital as opposed to communal what? Collectives, yeah. And that's what militated and became part and parcel of our Land Act that was passed in 1997. Rather, 1998. The 1998, yeah. Yeah. So, all land was basically privatized. And therefore, it's only individuals who can have access to land and have access to titles and what have you. However, there's a ray of hope within the Land Act. The Land Act allows permits for group ownerships, associations. You can have associations. You can actually, the Land Act is fairly comprehensive if we are to be proactive and harness its provisions. Associations can own land. Clans can come together and incorporate and own land. Communal land, rather customary land, is protected under that law. Now, my worry about the simmering tensions in particular in the Acholi sub-region is that they've taken, as Mr. Tinomasik has pointed out, class. It's become more of a class struggle. And why is it that you'd choose the fenced lands to be retained and the ones that are unfenced, or rather the fenced, the cattle keepers or the cattle owners that have fenced off their land, why should they be retained and the ones who have not fenced their land be evicted? Is it because that the ones who have fenced their land have the resources to fence their land, and those who have not fenced their land because they don't have the resources should therefore go? And you know as well as we do, and Francis indeed has pointed it out, that there are persons with access or who are infused with state security, with state power. And these are the persons who are basically protecting themselves from what? From eviction. And yet, from the discussions that you hear going on, these are the biggest problem. Because they have also allied with the what? Political elite. Some of the elite members of these communities to access these lands. So you can imagine, you come to Acholi, particular tract of land is owned by a certain clan, and they have their norms and traditions of guaranteeing tenure and access to what? To land. Now, because Acholi is basically a post-conflict society, and there's nowhere in the world where post-conflict reconstruction is a walk in the park. So you have political elites, LCs, DISOs, GISOs, LCs selling land to these people, witnessed by GISOs, witnessed by even maybe the RDC's office,
Ratified by the area land committees.
Area land committees, which do not have authority over that land. So you see the tensions that we are creating and are going to continue happening. Now, I don't have very little time, and I'm trying to speak within the confines of the law. There are nomads all over the world. But whenever you talk of nomadic patriotism, everybody tends to think of Africa. But they are in South America, they are in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, they are in Russia, Mongolia. But the best example I can give is the one of Botswana. In Botswana, nomadic pastoralism exists alongside the modern cattle keeping, modern breeding, modern what you'd call cattle economy, the cattle economy, animal production economy. And how did they do it? They did not transform them completely, but they were absorbed in the so-called modern economy of Botswana. So if you look at, and Mr. Tinamasiko really described it, although he limited himself to Nkore, and if you look at the stretch from northern Rwanda all through Nkore up to Karamoja, actually you'd even go up to the Imatong Hills, that is really what they call the cattle corridor. And even the nomenclature in Rwanda, that cattle corridor, the vast expanse of land, is called Umutara in Kinyarwanda. Now, when you go to Acholi, it's similar word, Otara. Even in Nkoro, Orutara. Orutara is really wide expanse of what? Of land. And those were migratory routes for not really nomads, but transhumans, what? Cattle keepers. Now, in Botswana, they mapped areas, migratory areas, for cattle, these herders, where they move from place to place, following the what? You know, rain. Rain is such a big issue in Botswana. Much of it is really desert and semi-arid. And, the same thing applies to, and now even with climate change, the conditions are more adverse, that we have prolonged spells of dry weather and sometimes extended rainfalls or patterns of weather that are unforeseen. So in this corridor, we can map and establish, government can set up a fund to provide critical public resources like cattle dips, cattle markets, to follow that migratory route, provide extension services, so that we have coexistence between this state of Uganda, the economy of Uganda that we are building, and the communal ownership of land, as well as the migratory routes for nomads. The law, I'm concluding, the law provides for access to land, it provides for land use, it provides for management of land. And these can be communally managed, they can be managed by associations, they can be managed by all these groups. I will end by saying that there's enough for every one of us. There's enough for our needs, there's not enough for our greed. Thank you very much. Yes.
From where you ended on law and people having the right to access land, and then also the idea that these are security concerns that inform these evictions. Now, during the 2008 evictions, and I think it was Grace Baroza, who termed the Operation Justice as Operation Injustice. At that time, there had also been a notice against manufacturing of polythene bags, Bovera at that time. They had been given a 6 months note. However, with the eviction of the people in Bulisa, they were given only 4 days. And she says, people who manufacture polythenes are given 6 months and human beings are given only 4 days to evict. When you also look at where you say they came from in Tanzania, there were concerns that these individuals had refused to naturalize. Yes. But there are also voices that some of these people already had voting cards, they had residence cards. The question is, why is it like a corporate view of ethnicity? Like you bundle them all together and evict them. Isn't it possible to deal with them on a case-by-case basis? Because it comes off as though you have an entire group which is not deserving of these universal human rights, land rights. And we say...
Actually, put it both actually. They were rendered stateless. And when a person is rendered stateless, actually the international community is supposed to come in for their defense. Unfortunately for us, these are neo-colonial states. And neo-colonial states have their, at state level, state to state level, there are certain dynamics that influence, that inform their decisions. You are aware that President Museveni would do everything possible under the sky to have Tanzania on board, particularly in his what? Grand scheme of East African integration. Mr. Tunamasiko, you were talking about 2026 elections and what have you. In his case, he's even looking at East African what? Integration. So if the Tanzanian state has taken a certain position against a certain group, he will be seen to side with the Tanzanian state. That is my thinking. I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for your attention. God bless you richly.
Okay, Trevor, you're going to help us connect Regina. I hope that
she has been hearing and she has been following.
I hope she can keep it short as well.
That you have Regina.
I think we are going to write down some of those questions that came out from her, but also at this opportune moment, we are going to take on questions from the audience. You can direct these questions to any of our panelists, and they will be answered.
It seems that the Balaalo question does emerge very much in the post-86 regime. Why is that so? Thank you.
My name is John Michael Alibu. I'm from Otuboi. Otuboi is one time a transit route for the Balaalo. My question is historical and economic in nature. Historical, Junior, you mentioned the history mainly from the 1900s. I wanted to get the relationship between or among the Banyamwisha of Goma in northern Kivu, and then the Banyamulenge in the ones in southern Kivu, that is Bukavu area. You know, those two have kind of a territory divided by a river Kivu. Banyamulenge have a territory on the south. Then the Banyamwisha have a territory in the north. Okay, Banyamwisha have both Tutsi and Hutu among them. Banyamulenge are strictly Tutsi. Yes, yeah? Yes. But now the issue is with the Banyamulenge here in Uganda. You find that there is no, as you mentioned, there is really no area to locate them. You mentioned basically around Chankwanzi area and Chiboga. Where do we locate them? Could we have a way of, in terms of law, trying to solve the issue of movement? Or today agriculture is moving forward. Can't we look at, for example, the Bulisa area? Cattle might not do well there, but goats do well that side because of the terrain. Can't we look at those options? The other one goes to Korakin and probably Regina. What's the way forward in terms of communal land? And this also related to Junior, who had said there is the Balaalo, the peasants may be a scapegoat to those who are elite. But I'm not looking at it in that way. I'm looking at it in a way that they are coordinated in terms of they are the elite who are studying, and some of them are becoming very specialists in law. And I'm worried, Korakin, the lawyers, sorry to mention the Balaalo lawyers, will be soon helping to defend the peasants. Can we not separate those two and try to connect them? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm David Jolly Muganzi. My questions are three in particular. One is regarding the identity of the Balaalo. Is this the way they identify themselves also? The second one is in terms of what are your recommendations for the ways for the steps ahead? I've learned so much in terms of where this has come from, but I've heard very little in terms of what are the recommendations from you people who have investigated the problem so well. And the third one is really their impact on our economy.
My colleague and I here were talking about the thin line between an analyst and a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, and that came about when you said that there could be a relationship between the directive for the eviction of the Balaalo and foot and mouth, and how it disappeared. Could you give us some more information about that, how you came to that conclusion or that thought? Yeah? Otherwise, we may look at it as a conspiracy theorist, yet you have information that you based on to come to that conclusion or thought. Thank you.
The district local governments are implementing a progressive approach. A progressive approach is if in this definition, Emulal, in the way we understand it different way, as acquired land and is Ugandan, and at bare minimum as acquired land and is able to live in harmony with his neighbors, and then that person should enjoy the rights that apply to every Ugandan. You said what happened. Because so that's what we are doing. And that answers the question that he asked. As local governments, are you contradicting the president? Like I said, I don't know whether if the president hears this, whether we're implementing his order or not. But I can confirm to you that not many provisions of his executive order are being implemented, because we found it problematic to implement them because they contradict the core provisions of the Constitution. And that's what we are doing on the ground. And that's why when you go to Kapalibong right now, I have a population of not less than 300 Balaalo people. We have issues which we are trying to deal with them, and we are dealing with them using a governance perspective. When you, and all of you guys who are scholars here, you know how governments, when they live longer, when they stay for many years from an academic perspective, you have had, it's not healthy for a democracy to run a country using regular executive orders. That should be so whether the president agrees with it, but that's my opinion, it's not a good thing. And whether in public I can make the statements, I can make them anywhere. Me, I'm a district chairman elected by people. This country needs to be governed through institutions of governance. Just like the way the president is elected using those institutions, he should bring his views and follow the current framework. So now, let me now answer the other question. Is the Bakenyi issues. Members, and I have had this, and I want to implore all of us who are listening to this discussion. This is a national problem. And we should, both our tones, our disappointments, our frustrations with the issues, should seek to mobilize the country to collectively approach it so that we can resolve it as a collective matter. Let me give you an example. The division commander for 3rd Division in Moroto is Nabasa. Don Nabasa. My CEO for the battalion that manages security in my district is called the Mugisha. The brigade commander is called Kidega. Now the danger when we approach this matter using you see these people are from here, they are finishing our place to ABCD. When it comes to implementing the executive order, in a meeting of 3 people, just imagine that meeting, there is a division commander, is called Nabasa Don, there is a brigade commander, is called Kidega, and then there is a battalion commander, is called the Mugisha, and then at the tail end in the unit, is called Okelo. And all of them went and held a meeting in that discussion. Don't you think they will have contradictions? And that's why it's our collective duty. And for us to speak about solving the Balaalo question, in this case, the contradictions that involve cattle keeping in this country, we should be able to make sure that everybody appreciates this problem, irrespective of whether he knows the issue. So it's a national problem that is dealing with challenges of climate change that he's talking about, and Karamojong. The question was brought, why are Karamojong treated separately than Banyankole? Sorry, and the Balaalo. And even by the way, for information, that's why I insisted from the beginning here. If you are comfortable in Kampala and you have been censored, that in that they asked you that what is your tribe, and you answered there that I am a Banyankole or Ankole in this case. In the context of people in the greater north and the greater east, if you have cows, they will, in their view, you may not agree, but for them they will perceive you as a what? A Balaalo. So it means that all of us are potential what? Balaalo. To those communities that may not what understand what you say, that this is a discriminatory one. Because for them they don't care. They will call you Balaalo because they think that is how it's supposed to be. Now, some of the people whom we are having now who are called migrants, and in this case should be chased away, have identity cards. For example, they have been in Serere, like you're talking about Bakenyi. I have, and 99.9% of the people who are staying in Kapalibong district, and in this case, they are keeping cause of Ankole Arid, have been censored. And when you look at their tribe, what they have answered, I'm a Munyoro, They have answered I am Ankole. They have answered I am Uganda. They have also answered. And surprisingly, some of them have been there for more than 15 years. And some of their children are studying in the same schools and ABC. Some of them have naturalized. And on a good note, in some communities, when you try to chase Balaalos, citizens who are not educated, you see, we have had problems with education. The ordinary people who are,
They live together.
the ordinary people who are staying there locally there, they really find, they move on. And that's the same problem we have had on corruption issues. One time when I was in Action Aid, we went for a meeting to Kumi, for a baraza, you know those barazas. Then we told communities that we are mobilizing them to fight corruption. One old man said, but when you look at me, I don't know even a bank, I don't know a voucher, I don't know government budgets and ABC. That corruption issues is for you who went to school, got your jobs, you're stealing yourselves in those offices, now you're mobilizing us as outsiders to help you fight. What do I do? He said, you have gone to school, sort out your problem. If you mean well for us, we have voted for you, give us the roads. If you want to steal the country, steal. In any case, me, I don't live in Kampala. If I lose nothing, I only want rainfall. Now, lastly, what's the way forward? We have a challenge in policy prescriptions for livestock keeping in this country, particularly on the beef sector. Many of the Balaalos, in quotes, keep cows that have a relationship with the beef cows. The current, we seem to be clear on how to deal with the dairy sector.
It's regulated.
And when we look at the president, in his descriptions, in his analysis, in every time he's sensitizing people on where to move, he says, let's deal with the dairy sector. And indeed, we seem to know how to manage the milk sector. And the milk sector comes from particular type of what? Cows. So these Balaalos, or in this case, the Zebu group, have, and that's why even when you look at, I wanted to give you, go and do a study. We have the least amount of investment in terms of public infrastructure, in terms of support in beef sector part of the country. And that's why undertones made by Akulu exist in the greater part of the north. That when you look at research, when you look at investments, many of the public investments on livestock sector by Ministry of Agriculture, both in private and in organizations, have been concentrating on the dairy area. And therefore, politically, there is a belief that the greater north, which is involved in the meat production, has not received substantial amount of public investments. And if we need to have a discussion, and now this is for us politicians, because we discuss these matters in politics, we must go back and we should recommend, as a country, we need to have streamline the policy prescriptions on how to improve support investments in the beef sector for the country. Otherwise, as it is right now, we have, let me give you an example, all sectors in this country that have a lot of, that are growing in terms of imports, exports, and ABC in the production sector, have an authority. We have dairy development authority. We have cotton. We have coffee. And we have discussed, we wanted to meet, the president came to Teso the other time, he dodged us. We wanted to tell him that as a sub-region, and for the greater north, we wanted to submit to him that we don't agree with your prescriptions. We fully think that maybe if we invest in the beef sector, some of these so-called unoccupied territories in the greater north, where people are moving and we are now having contradictions with them, will be occupied because the sector has received public attention. So the politics there is that diverting people to produce citrus, is deliberate. So, and yet, so we asked him, so for us, as a country, both in Ankole, in Busoga, in everywhere, we should, Minister of Agriculture, should develop a comprehensive policy framework on the beef sector. And if we do it, maybe those Balaalos that we are now struggling, because when they go there, they even don't know where to buy. And I want to let you another, the challenge they are facing. And it's a crisis in terms of disaster. Right now, you have had water has come. Most of those areas in the north now have flooding. Many of the Balaalos were in
wetlands. So there have been waterlogged areas. None of them have been forced to come upwards. So the confrontations are moving faster and bigger. So I think it is important as a country, and I'm speaking this as someone who believes in Project Uganda, that we should discuss this matter, put more investments in the sector, and when we invest in that sector, everybody will be benefiting from the rewards of a promising economy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. We've not had executive orders in a long time. No? The Constitution came into effect in 1995. And to the best of my collection, I don't think we've had more than 2 or 3 executive orders. Presidential, no, directives we have had, but executive orders in terms of Article 99 Article 99 was one of the Constitution. The mere fact that we've had an executive order coming to effect, or an attempt to effectuate an executive order, means that there was intense political pressure, and going the legislative way would never resolve the issues that were at hand. When you had Junior Tunamatsiko, Tunamatsiko means he has hope. And you can see he really has hope from his body language and his presentation. No, we are supposed to instill hope. By the way, nobody is going to fix Uganda for you. Nobody is going to fix Uganda for you. Uganda can only be fixed by ourselves. And there are those people who have passed their sell-by date. I can see many of you are very young. You're still on this other side of 30. 81% of Uganda's electorate is between the age of 18 and what? And 30. It's your future that you can guarantee by debates like this, by setting the agenda, by having barazas like this, and setting the agenda. But let me not derail. You heard when Junior was speaking, he kept bouncing the Balaalo issue between basically a family, brother and what? Brother and a big bro, both generals, but one senior than the other. And that the communication was from one brother to another, you know. And I think these are the intricacies we tend to find in governance, in particular on a matter as explosive as land, access to land, land tenure, land ownership, and land use in Acholi. If we are to implement, if we are to give effect to the letter and spirit of our Land Act, we can be able to contain and address these pressures. Now, we do have a land fund. We do have a land fund that is created under the Land Act. That land fund is supposed to cater for interests like this, to cater for emergencies like what? Like this. Compensation of persons who have been dispossessed of land, like those who have been forcefully removed from the national parks, but also the public infrastructure I was talking about. And now that also brings me to the aspect that he talked about of beef production. Is Anthony here? Tony Natif? Tony. He'll tell you I am involved in an export. Tony, I'm trying to explain the issue of beef production came up.
Yes.
Vis-a-vis milk production. And the reason why I'm calling him, I look up to him in terms of on matters to do with entrepreneurship outside of his pharmaceutical experience. The chairman of the district here talked about that the dairy sector is regulated, and all the public infrastructure, all the public expenditure in the animal industry is geared towards the dairy sector and not meat, the beef, meat production. And I agree with him, and I want to, as well as I do that, I'm involved in export production. Yes. For beef.
Yes, you invested
in that. And it's been, believe me, I agree with him, it's been personal funds, and it's choking us. It's not regulated at all. It's not regulated at all. It's very highly taxed. The equipment is very highly taxed. Issues of quality. Now, if we had extension services, for one, these pastoralists, the nomad pastoralists, I remember I talked about migratory. You have extension services, you have water reservoirs, water deep tanks, you have dams, valley dams for them, then the quality would be able to improve. And if you establish an authority and inject finances, then you would see even some of these pressures that we have over because at the end of the day, he told you that at the micro level, there's no difference between a Balaalo peasant and a Teso peasant. They integrate very easily. They assimilate easily. The problem is usually with us the so-called elite, and that struggle, I beg to submit, is economic.
And just before we should just to keep on that, to pastoralists, to Karamoja, to Balaalo, to Aniteso, to anybody else, mobility is a factor of production. Just the same way you need capital, you need knowledge. That transhumance, it's itself an integral component of livestock keeping. So when you discriminate it, when you condemn it, you actually collapsing
that
production.
Economy.
That's that type of
their livelihood.
Yes.
The livelihood.
Because the definition of pastoralism is very archaic. That is a movement of people from place to place in search of water and pasture. Now that's why we need government. If you don't, then you invest so people can have water. You don't give people water, but you're giving citizens in towns here piped water. Now, why will you give Kampala National Water and Sewage Corporation under public investment, and you cannot invest in Karamoja water?
I think my point is made, but more importantly, and this is where you young minds really have to come in. When you look at the land fund in Uganda, it has mainly been accessed by mafia, by thieves, and colluding technocrats with businessmen in town. It is not serving the purpose for which it was created. And it is incumbent upon persons in this room to hold our leaders to account. When talking about the issue of Balaalo, it's very difficult to divorce the sentiments around ethnic identity. Now, he talked about the migrations over the years. There are many Balaalo, so-called Balaalo, or pastoralists who came from Kwale, pastoralists who came from Rwanda, who are settled in Teso, even as far as Pakwach. Pakwach, and they live in harmony. They live in harmony with the local communities.
We had some in Yumbe.
Yumbe, exactly like Yumbe, that's the area, West Nile. They are very good pastures. Actually, the pastures from Acholi up to that area, Yumbe, are very similar to the pastures, and very good pastures, by the way, very good pastures for animal production. I'm going to wrap it up in this manner. That the challenge we have is that there's been elite persons, even within the Acholi community, who have passed unto themselves land that does not belong to them, that ordinarily wouldn't end up in their what? In their hands. Elite Acholi. And many of them are using this as a decoy to divert attention from their land grabbing activities. Now, it's very easy to deflect attention to a general. That's not me to. I don't mean to say that the generals are not involved. They should be equally condemned. But there are some persons within actually the Acholi community who are using this as a facade, as a decoy, to protect themselves, and they've come out very loudly. They are much louder than even some of our voices here, because they have the platform, they have the offices, they have the resources. And it does happen in societies that are evolving and are still at the stage of primitive accumulation of wealth. And the chairman has made it very clear that the cattle economy is being used as an avenue for laundering money that is coming from corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councillor Edgar. Thank you. I think we are going to conclude with Junior, but maybe in your response you want to incorporate the idea that many want to distinguish the contemporary Mularo from what one of the speakers online called the modern day Mularo. But also there is this, that the problem really in northern Uganda is not the Balaalo generally as discussed, but you have a few elite or even political or people within the army who have the means that are causing havoc, are causing the problem. And the voices from Acholi don't seem to target those. Is it a clever thing that we should maybe turn our guns as activists, those that are, from focusing on Balaalo as an ethnicity and target these big the elite that have access to the tools that they use to take over the land?
Thank you. I'm glad I've been joined by very passionate panelists who believe in this cause and who understand it deeply. Just as they believe in Project Uganda, we have
You're anarchist, so
the man is trying to number to go home, but
we have electricity oversupply, but we are in darkness. So you can imagine. But on the whole, it's been a very constructive engagement, and I've learned a lot from the chairperson who's been on the ground, Edgar who's been in the trenches of the Balaalo question for a decade and more. And I really believe that Uganda is a country of questions. There are so many. The Northern question, the Ira Republic question that Natif doesn't acknowledge. The Uganda question.
The Banyarwanda question.
The
Banyarwanda question.
Okay, the Banyarwanda question. And as I usually remind him, the Bagisu question, because in 1954 they forced Bagweri out of Umbari and forcefully circumcised them. So Uganda as a country is a place that needs a middle ground in which contending factions can come together, in which certain scholars of a certain philosophical underpinning believe in elite theory that presupposes elites of different factions coming together to see a state they occupy moving forward in a certain positive direction. I will try to bridge questions into one. One is on the Balaalo, why is it a thing post-1986? Another one is on the identity of the Balaalo and how they identify themselves and their contribution to the economy of Uganda, if that matters at all. And the definition, or if climate change exacerbates the current predicament. One, I think the identity of the Balaalo as a people, the moderator was saying that as an ethnic identity. I don't think that the Balaalo actually self-identify as Balaalo. It is an external definition forced onto them that I am here and they say you are a Mularo, but I'm not a Mularo. It's not my ethnic identity. Mularo, I usually argue with people that to be a Muhima is not an ethnic identity. It is an occupation. So in pre-colonial Ngole, if you are a Muhima, you used to rear cattle. So if I rear cattle, I'm a Muhima. A Mwiru as a category was also not an ethnic identity, as the anthropologists of colonial later came to.
It's like a driver.
No, not at all. I think driver of who? So
I'm saying occupation.
No, yes, it was an occupation. So usually we had
they even had another group called Bahesi.
Yes, Bahesi,
where
extractors, Veiru cultivators, Bagaragwa, the people who occupied the royal palace of Mugabe, and then the Bahinda clan at the helm. But colonial rule kind of came and imposed it on us and said that actually Obuhima is an identity, just like how they imposed on Tutsi
as a political identity permanent in its very nature. But it was porous, that if I could own cattle, I become a human. So Balaalo is an external definition of a people to say that these people, since you rear cattle or you look after our cattle, you are a Balaalo. But in northern Uganda, when it crosses River Nile, it takes on another form. So when you are a Balaalo, you rear Ankole cattle, you are a Munyankole or a Munyarwanda. But the people actually identify on those primary ethnic identities, and if they define those, then in a way Uganda state incorporates them. Because if I say I'm a Balaalo but I'm a Munyankole, it means we have an origin. If I'm a Munyarwanda, it means I have an origin. But Balaalo, in a way, to be a Balaalo is not to belong anywhere. You're just a Balaalo. You're just a Balaalo. You're somewhere but nowhere. So it means they can evict you from here, throw you here, or you just look where to belong, but you actually have no stake in this country. So for me, we must first acknowledge that injustice in the categorization of a people on that very narrow definition. Why it became a thing in post-1986, I think it was a thing, but the word Balaalo to become so prominent came with these land evictions, and it became so big after the 1990 Augura uprisings, in which ranchers chased away squatters, and then they started to roam around all that area. So it's why we have it as a problem now with increased land pressure, commercial farming in the northern Uganda, oil and gas exploitation in Buritsi. So people end up with nowhere to fall. It's not in Rwamwanja, in Kamwenje, it's not in Shara Ranch, where people could go and rear cows. Now it's owned by Basita. So they have nowhere to go. So they end up in space, interfering and entering people's private lands and causing all of that problems and belonging nowhere. The question of Banyamwisha and Banyamulenge, I don't know much about Banyamwisha, but I know that the people who occupied the Mulenge Hill in Congo today became a thing after the path of genocide. So when genocide moved from Uganda to Rwanda, then to Congo, and Kabarebe attacking Kinshasa, so the Batutsi of the Mulenge Hill became a thing. So they became target of it still rhymes, it's still a problem of our post-colonial states and how they have accommodated different identities. The people they consider natives and the people they consider immigrants, even when those people have been in those areas, prior to colonial rule. Someone said that it is sad that in Uganda we are debating origins of our people and not AI. But I think the biggest bestsellers on the question of identity, from Francis Fukuyama's Identity, or Kwame Apia's The Lies That Bind, or they have been in North America and Europe. The people that are discussing these questions are not actually here, but there is a contestation on people that belong in the states that we occupy, indigenous Americans in USA, here, Balaalo, we are trying to situate them. So problematization of the state and finding a way of how to harmonize these differences and people coexisting is a global thing. It's not just a Ugandan affair. And on the question of if climate change has exacerbated this problem, I do not believe climate change has, but I don't have a single place to say that the desertification. You see Nigeria, or in Niger, you can say that the northern part, the Sahara has been extending southwards, forcing the Fulani pastoralists moving southwards, invading the cultivated sedentary in Nigeria. But in Uganda, I can't actually situate that. It's internal displacement out of one on colonial policy that displaced people, and the government continued support or appreciation of that policy that has led to. I can't find where climate change has actually led to this Balaalo problem. I think that's all.
Maybe before you finish, there's still a question on the president and government's approach to the economy there's the 4-acre model, trying to, transform our economies to fit.
Chief, we have had too many.
It is very
too many
okay, but
experiments.
for me,
I don't know which one we are following. Quite frankly, I got lost in there.
Yes. I think the question is how, because
you just want me to get me on the wrong side of this. For a man who owns 15 acres in Ichozi, it's very difficult to tell people to own 4-acre model.
15 acres, 15 square miles.
I don't know. But I mean, square miles are so many and cows are innumerable. So it's very hard to.
When it's talking about the economic model,
Yeah, but
transformation.
So why can't you do why can't you practice what you preach?
Junior, I think my question is not really about Museveni, because even in the discussion.
But who is advocating for 4-acre model?
We can predate it even the colonialists who thought that there was more economic value from maybe big production, even if we are talking about conservation, and that the way of life of the Balaalo does not give you that kind of economic value in terms of taxes, in terms of exportation. So how do we balance their way of life in a way that government would, find?
My approach. There is a thing that overgrazing leads to desertification, but there is no such scientific proof towards that. Actually, transhumance leads to protection of the ecosystem.
It's actually a response to protecting the environment.
Yes. But you're forcing me to accept this Rostov's mode of development that for the industrial development and what, which I think Museveni as a student of modernization actually believes in. So I think that Uganda as a country can actually accommodate pastoralism and can find a way, as the chairman has highlighted, to make it economical through beef production, through certain policies that can accommodate them, and then we see how to move.
Mr. Chairman, it's strange how we are from different backgrounds, and quite frankly, it's the first time we're meeting, but we seem to be agreed.
Brilliant, knows the
we seem to be, so why is it that policy, and okay, let me point the finger in the right direction. Why is it General Saleh and his brother General Museveni are out of sync with brains like this? Where is the disjuncture? Where is the disjuncture? Whom does he have for advisors?
We probably hope that as Public Square we shall create more of these spaces so that we can bring these guys with brilliant minds together to shape discussion, discourse, and maybe also influence policy if the people in charge are willing to listen.
And maybe just to give you feedback. Members, 4 years ago, I was like all of us. Now, because of the urge to change things, every time we had the discussions like what public discourse is, Public Square is doing, we could make recommendations at the tail end of and all of them pointed to policy. So I said, why do I waste my time be in the history
incubation?
Let me go to the what?
To the
policy part. So that we take these ideas to the what? To the policy. Now, I was lucky. Villagers say, okay, we are voting you. Because the problem we have had is that eventually, even if Tabaro was extremely intelligent and what we're doing here, if eventually needs these things, it has to go to the what? To the politician. So I said, let me go and become the what? The politician. So that I take my mind there. And instead of lobby, because at that time they say, let's lobby politicians to change. They said, no, I don't want lobby. Let me go there myself. You don't need lobby. Now, there has been some impact. In my district, I have created a corridor. Despite of contradictions with Karamoja, in terms of guns, insecurity, and the rest. But because I strongly believe that pastoralism is a factor of production, mobility is a factor of production. The only district in the Greater North with a safe corridor created for pastoralists during time of dry season is only Kapelebyo.
Wow.
Now, what am I bringing to you here? The challenge we have had, people have been discussing that. Why is it that somebody is good when he becomes a politicians, and in this case MPs, they mess up. If you brought LOC 5s in the same house and brought MPs the same house. LOC 5 will be much more fairly objective. Yes. Because LOC 5s earn less amount of money. Now, the salary they pay MPs as you see, let me tell you, that house that we have in this country, that is the only house where all brains are what? Corrupted. Let me give you an example. I wrote a public opinion on public policy. How can you give MPs their salary they get is 30 million? But you're telling us that every month you consolidate their fuel. They get it as a salary for fuel, but they don't account. It's a recurrent what? Expenditure. Now, to other public leaders like LC5s, that fuel is what? Accounted for.
Yes, you have to field trips.
You have to account for it. Now, members of parliament, that's why I'm going to encourage you why we are having a problem in the country, why policy doesn't meet with what? With the realities. So members of parliament, how do you get public resources and it's entered into your personal or private account, and you have nobody, because you have they gave you airtime, they give you transport, you don't account for it, and you have a right to use it even for buying chairs, for burials, and yet it was meant for fuel. So until we sort out the politics, and I want to encourage all of us here, until Ugandans get very annoyed and believe that our politics needs to be fixed, we will debate from think tank to think tank, and we will have issues. So when there is opportunity in your village to participate in politics, either in form of picketing, in form of voting, in form of any expression as provided by the Constitution, says it up. When you see people like Agatha making statements on social media, whatever tool you have, please utilize it to fix the country.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, you heard me say that nobody is going to fix Uganda for you. You're going to have to do it yourselves.
As Councillor Tabaro said, there is enough resources for all of us. We can all be accommodated. The discussion does not end with this panel. We are going to have a more free kind of environment. You can continue the discussion while you network. From us and from me on this panel, we were happy to have all of you. Welcome to Public Square.
My name is Joe Mukisa. I'm a member of Public Square. And to, however, highlight the fact that the paper has eluded the question of the tribe. Because even when Dolo stands and says that the Balaalo must leave, he's saying this is our homeland. The Balaalo also, the idea is that they should have, at least if they don't have, they should have a homeland. So for me, the question of the organization of the political structure of the state is a very important question that the paper eludes. The paper also eludes the question of the agrarian question and the current manifestation of capitalism in the neoliberal facet. But all said, the paper was good in illuminating certain questions. It's one paper, it cannot cover everything, and the panel is fantastic. So from the team at Public Square, and the team lead will be speaking. Thank you so much.
It gives me great pleasure to see, I may be biased, but I think this was a fantastic discussion of an issue that has been in this country for more than 100 years. Junior, my colleague, and another colleague of mine called Tigushamwa, who sadly is not around, they've spent endless nights researching this paper, and we can't thank them enough. They are very young people, barely 25. Seriously though, they are very young people. But, you know, when you listen to them, you get comfort in the knowledge that this country's future is going to be in the right hands. And I'm very fortunate
to work with them. I'm also extremely grateful that we get to partner with people like Agora, whose team lead Agatha is around. Many of you have seen some of our work in the Parliament exhibition space, in the recent work we've been doing with finance guys to try and explain the budget to the Montua 1C, to some of the work we've done looking at what drives government decisions to invest in private enterprises. We did quite a bit of work there in the coffee investigation. But we do, when we're starting the public square, most of our thought process was around what you just witnessed today. How do we take a complex public policy issue and discuss it around a fireplace? How do we frame those conversations into bite-sized information that my grandmother or grand auntie in Bunangabo understands? And really, that's the essence of public square. It's not about getting very smart people into a room to kind of pontificate about complex issues. It's about getting everyone who has a stake in the Ugandan, in the East African experiment to come and bring their idea on how they should be governed, on how the resources that are supposed to build the future that we are promised and the future we promise our great-grandchildren, how those resources are managed. When they're not managed well, you're going to have us and the Agathas of this world and the Tokos of this world and the Kakwenzas of this world and the Spires of this world make a lot of noise and become irritants in the eyes of some people. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what we all care about is that my grandchild, President Museveni's grandchild, Agatha's grandchild, anyone's grandchild, has a fair shake at the opportunities that this country has to offer. And the only way we do that is by having conversations like this, by having contestation of ideas in a very safe space. We do not agree much, but what we agree on is, one, we all care about Uganda, apart from Junior. No, I'm joking. Yeah, we all care about this thing that's called Uganda. It's not perfect. Its formation is not perfect. Every day we wake up to make sure we perfect what the British put together for purely economic interests. We hope that today built a block on furthering the conversation, built around creating a better Uganda for everyone. And please continue participating in public square work. Let's preach the gospel. If our resources allow, currently we are really self-funded. If our resources allow, we want to take these discussions even up to Kapelabyong, to the deepest corners of this country. I have to thank our panelists. I especially have to thank the chairman who moved more than 300 kilometers to come and be with us. I want to thank, I really think it's important that I mention them by name. I have to thank Herbert. He had to rush to be here. He had the option of taking a ride here, but he jumped on a border to be here, and of all places that he would lose his phone, he lost the phone in Muyenga. Lawel, thank you so much. You almost gave us a heart attack today. We didn't think you were going to be here on time. But you showed up just in time and really did a fabulous job. I thank you so much, Lawel, in a special way. Lawel is one of my favorites, so I'm not afraid to publicly acknowledge that and also publicly admonish him sometimes. You must have seen a very fashionable, depends on which side of the the fashion universe you come from. The guy in green trousers. I'm colorblind, so that's my excuse. Trevor. Trevor is an artist and a curator whose mind works in a very unique way. He's very heavily steeped in the political economy. He will describe inequality in a way that will make you feel like you're reading some of Shakespeare's best writings. He knows how to make the most absurd of situations sound almost palatable. But behind that veneer of rebellion sits a very organized human mind, and a lot of the work, the stuff that went well today, is thanks to him and people like Ruth, people like Joe, again Tigushamo in absentia, people like Joel, and some of our colleagues who are not here. So thank you so much. See you next time at the next Public Square event. If you have a topic that you think we need to give extra attention to, please reach out. If you have an article that you want to push about a public policy issue, about other areas of our endeavor, like climate change and energy transition, civic education, entrepreneurship, public accountability, please hit us up. We exist to platform ideas and defend a lot of these, generate knowledge. So everyone is a member of Public Square. So please feel free to contribute. We're not taking gifts in terms of money, but maybe with time, as our work demands, we may reach out to have the Ugandan population finance its own transformation. So when we reach out on that front, please don't hesitate to chip in. You could also chip in with time. And we see how well to build this in order to impact our society in a positive manner. Thank you so much. And I open up the floor to networking. The boat is ready to sail. We have all the drinks you need. Dinner is served. Thank you, Tuti and the team. Feel at Public Square.